Hi, this is Ken Basilick. My paper is Trials and Tribulations and Digging the Trail to Pottstown. It deals with how archaeologists interpret the data that they excavate. The work I'm going to talk about today was actually performed 3 years ago as part of a project along the Schuylkill River Trail. The archaeological work was sponsored by Chester County in association with the Federal Highway Administration and PennDOT. As you can see from the slide to the left, the section of the Schuylkill River Trail is between Parker's Ford and just shy of Pottstown in Chester County. A large number of archaeological sites in Chester County have been identified within a mile of the portion of the Schuylkill River Trail that was investigated. But most of these sites were not really fully investigated, and not a lot of information was available for most of the sites. In the chart on this slide, you can get an idea of the number of sites in Chester County that are close by, but very little is known about them. The archaeological work performed for this portion of the Schuylkill River Trail identified 2 archaeological sites that were evaluated during earlier phases of the archaeological work as having the potential to provide important information to our understanding of regional prehistory. Portions of sites 36 CH 1000 and 36 CH 1001 were to be impacted by the construction of the trail. Data recovery archaeological investigations were undertaken within the areas of the sites to be impacted. This is the Area of Potential Effects, or APE. The APE was approximately 5 meters wide, so a little bit more than 15 feet, which complicated site interpretation. The archaeological work began with the hand excavation of test units within the 5-meter wide Area of Potential Effects. And although the depth of the deposits varied, all the artifacts at the site 36 CH 1000 were found in the plow zone soils. Features were identified below these historic plow zone soils, both in the test units excavated, but also when the plow zone was mechanically stripped from the portion of site 36 CH 1000 that was investigated. Although there were a large number of features that were found, no pattern in the placement of the features could be discerned. There were a large number of artifacts recovered from the site, all from the plow zone soils. Most of the material was lithic debitage. Lithic debitage are the flakes of stone that generally result from the making of stone tools or in the sharpening and maintenance of stone tools. Very few tools were recovered, and few objects were found like the projectile points and pottery on this slide, which helped in the dating of site 36 CH 1000. Interpreting what was dug up from site 36 CH 1000 required the archaeologists to use a variety of tools. The first step was we looked at peaks and valley in a number of different artifact groups, and by looking at those peaks and valley, we were able to identify 9 different areas within the site. Organizing the information gathered from the test units was often confusing as there was variation in the number and percentage of artifacts present in each test unit. The upper chart at left of the slide shows the percentage of stone flake types for each test unit. The lower chart shows the percentage of type of stone present in each test unit. Why some patterns are evident, looking at the information by test unit made interpretation difficult. Looking at the percentages of stone flake types by area for site 36 CH 1000 in this table shows little variability in flake types, as you can see from the yellow numbers at the top of the chart. There are also very few differences in the mean size of the artifacts, as can be seen in the yellow numbers at the bottom of the chart. However, there is considerable difference in the percentages of the stone types being used across the site, as seen in the red numbers. The similarities and differences for site 36 CH 1000 that could be seen in the table on the previous slide are graphically displayed on the charts to the left. The analysis of the artifacts was performed by areas for a range of artifact attributes. The analysis led the archaeologists to conclude that the areas likely represented the use of the landscape over a period of time, but that the activities undertaken by the Native Americans at this location were very similar through time. A lot of analysis went into the material that was recovered from Site 36CH1000. The artifacts were looked at in a variety of different ways, features were examined, and a series of conclusions that are presented on this slide are what was the end result of the work. All the material was found in the plow zone. There were 41 post hole features found, but no pattern within the 5-meter wide by 105-meter long area that was looked at could be found in the post holes. There were 6 pre-contact pits. Unfortunately, they did not contain any faunal or floral remains that were related to the Native American occupation of the site. 6,800 artifacts were found. It was almost all, 93%, of the assemblage was lithic debitage. The majority of the material was jasper and quartzite. Now, the site was occupied over a range of time. Material ranging from the early woodland through the late woodland was found, but for the most part, most of the areas of those 9 areas we discussed above seem to date to the middle woodland, although maybe towards the end of the middle woodland near the transition to the late woodland. While there was some overlap in what was going on, it was impossible to identify 9 discrete occupation or activity areas. Now the problem is that we're thinking they're occupation areas because the activities that were being undertaken were similar in all the different areas. So technically I would say you can't really say the activity areas differed. The artifacts and features indicated hunting and the processing of hides. There's no indication, even though we were right next to the Schuylkill River, there's no material suggestive of fishing in the narrow corridor that we examined. And what this tells us is that attractive land areas for short-term settlement exhibit consistent reuse by native peoples. If it's a nice place, when one group comes during the next seasonal round, they'll come back to the same place. The second site, Site 36CH1001, was located a short distance north of Site 36CH1000. A similar testing strategy was employed, test unit excavation followed by stripping of the topsoils. Although a much smaller area than 36CH1000, Site 36CH1001 had more than 500 features. Unfortunately, more than 60% of those features turned out to be non-cultural. They were either roots or animal burrows, but at the surface, you really could not tell until you excavated them. Of the Native American features that were found, no pattern could actually be found in the 5-meter wide corridor that was studied. All of the artifacts from Site 36CH1001 were recovered from the plow zone soils, much like Site 36CH1000. The artifacts, again, just like 36CH1000, were primarily lithic debitage. Very few tools were recovered, and even fewer objects were found, like the projectile points and pottery on this slide, which helped in the dating of the site. The same type of analysis was applied to 36CH1001 as with the other site. In this particular case, by looking at the peaks and valley in the number of different artifacts groups, it was possible to identify 5 different areas within Site 36CH1001. Slightly different than that site, though, if you'll notice, is that you actually peak. There's fewer objects at one end of the site than there are at the other, which held out some thoughts that perhaps we were looking at one site that was distributed over an area, with a peak at area 3 and the edges of the site being represented in areas 1 and 5. There was some thought that there was evidence here for one site, one time period, single component site, because we have a slightly different pattern here at this site than we did at the previous one. And you could look at this particular chart that shows differences in the types of debitage that were found across the site. So the potential was that there was slightly different activities going on at different areas. Not only was the densest area in area 3 slightly less dense in 2 and 4, and the least density in 1 and 5, but the types of debitage that was being found differed in these areas as well. So the type of stone that was used to make tools for 36CH1001 was a little bit different than what we found at site 36CH1000. Quartz was the primary material, as opposed to jasper and quartzite, which predominated on 36CH1000. But as you can see from this chart, quartz did not predominate across the entire area. When you got to the portion where area 4 and 5, you also had jasper and quartzite as being high concentrations. So a little bit more activities that are different can be seen here at 36CH1001 than in 36CH1000. So this slide shows you our basic conclusions about 36CH1001. Again, the artifacts were all in the plow zone. We had 532 features, but most of them were not cultural. 5 of the features that were cultural were pit features, and 136 of them were post holes. Now, unfortunately, again, no pattern in the 5-meter wide area that was looked at, and the pit features, although they contained seeds, most of those seeds turned out to be modern in date. There were no faunal remains, so not much could be told from the features in this 5-meter wide area. A little less than 2,000 artifacts were found, and again, the artifact assemblage was primarily lithic debitage. Quartz was the most prevalent lithic source material that was found. And again, the site was occupied over a range of time, but maybe not. It was really, you had objects that had a large time frame that suggests that it could have been, but primarily the material seemed to be from the very late middle woodland, kind of at the very early late woodland period. So it could in fact have been a single component site, but it's probably not. It probably represents a lot of overlap of people coming more than one time, but maybe only for a short period of time as opposed to the previous site where we were talking thousands of years of occupation. This may have been a much shorter period of time. And again, there's overlap, but it was possible to identify 5 discrete occupation/activity areas. And in this case, we probably can be talking about activity areas as well as occupations. It could be one or the other. There's slightly different lithic materials being found. There's slightly different types of artifacts being found. However, in general, what's being undertaken was very similar, even though it varied across the site. And also very similar to Site 36CH1000 in that the activities that appeared to be being undertaken related to hunting and processing of hides. And again, no evidence, even though we're adjacent to the Schuylkill River, suggesting that fishing was going on. Now, doesn't mean it wasn't, just means in that 5-meter wide space that we were looking at, there was no evidence. And again, what it's trying to show you, and a little bit less so maybe here than what we saw in 36CH1000, was that favorable landscape settings tend to be dense, continuous spreads of material over a wide area, which implies that people return many times to the same general area on the landscape to live. So what did we learn from the work that we did at these two sites? Well, before we get into that, the first thing we have to worry about is that drawing firm conclusions is a little difficult because we only looked at a 5-meter wide area. So whether what we think was going on at the sites based on that 5-meter interval or 5-meter wide area, it may not be necessarily what's actually going on in the sites. If we looked at the sites in a larger area, we could make more things. We just have to hope that the strip that we did through the site is representative. Now, on the positive side, the sites are still there. If in the future someone goes back to further investigate, we've collected the information that was going to be destroyed through the construction of the trail. Now, the initial analysis at each of the sites attempted to ascertain what type of occupation was there. Were we looking at a base camp? Were we looking at a hunting station? What was actually going on? And after the initial work, 36 CH-1000 was seen to be a good candidate for a base camp occupation. And that was important because very few sites within the Schuylkill drainage date to the middle woodland period, or in this particular case, the middle woodland to the early late woodland. Very few of these sites were found that contained features which represent living structures or living and work areas. But recent work from other sites along the Schuylkill River has provided evidence that such base camps exist. So the potential was, for this particular section of the Schuylkill, we might have had one. Now, if a site represents the remains of a base camp, you could expect a large number and a variety of tool types and artifact classes. Neither of the sites we looked at contained a large number of tools. Base camps might be expected to contain a wide variety of features, including post holes representing living structures, hearths, as well as storage features. And although post holes were present and there was fire-cracked rock which suggested the presence of hearths, relatively few cultural features were encountered that suggested a base camp. Specialized tool production areas that are spatially segregated could be expected to be present at base camps. Now, while activity areas have been postulated at both sites, these areas appear to represent similar activities rather than specialized activity areas. And the sites seem to represent the remains of temporally specialized procurement camps. And such sites would be expected to have a limited range and number of tool types and artifact classes, and features would be limited in number and distribution, and lithic fabrication would be restricted to late-stage biface production and maintenance. Both sites appear to meet all these criteria, so it's suggested there are some sort of procurement camps. Now, the portions of the site investigated appear to fit well with the character of woodland group social organization that has been posited for similar cultural complexes by J. Custer out of the University of Delaware. And J. Custer suggested that groups from this period had a mixed subsistence base, incorporating the use of a variety of animal and wild and domestic plant foods, and seasonal movement through a variety of what he called microband and macroband and special purpose camps. As he sees it, domesticated plant foods were added only slowly to the food base in the latter part of the late woodland, and never constituted the primary focus of subsistence activities for groups in this area. So the socioeconomic patterns based on food procurement system, or even the early late woodland groups in southeastern Pennsylvania, only differed slightly from those of earlier woodland and archaic groups. The two sites that we looked at seem to fit this pattern. So to conclude, archaeologists dig things up, they analyze the material, but sometimes things just don't just jump out at you as to what's going on and what you're seeing. A lot of trial and error. There's a lot of looking at material in a variety of different ways, hoping to find a pattern in not only what you find in the ground, but what you take out of the ground. In this particular case, we were actually able to find things that are important for the regional prehistory, although not definitive. And it's just one more step that adds to our knowledge that hopefully will help frame other work that's being done in the region and help us to better understand how the Native Americans used the landscape, particularly in that middle woodland to early late woodland period in the Schuylkill Valley. Thank you all for tuning in.